And there was a young trafficked woman I worked with from Vietnam, and she didn't have a lot of English. So they thought at the hostel we'll bring in a music therapist rather than a talking counsellor. And we just sit on the floor and she'd draw and we'd talk and we'd use pre-composed songs. I would choose pre-composed songs to help her voice maybe what she couldn't speak. And as her English improved, she said, you really see me, you really get me. How come, we're only here an hour a week? And I said, just because I'm sitting with you, there's no agenda. So there you go. It's about trust, safety, love, no agenda, being alongside.
Welcome to Leading Notes, where I talk with musicians who are leading the revitalisation of social health in our communities. I'm your host, Melissa Forbes. Phoene Cave is a registered music therapist, creative project manager, singer, trainer, and reflective practice supervisor in the creative health field. Phoene has spent 2 decades working with a range of diverse communities in nurseries, schools, further and higher education, concert halls, social housing, care homes, hospitals, and a detention centre and a prison. Phoene Cave, welcome to Leading Notes.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
Very excited to have you on the show. And I'm going to jump straight into the heart of your work, Phoene. Tell me about your journey to becoming a world specialist in singing for lung health.
My God, a world specialist. It's very niche, isn't it? It's not something that people wake up and go, I know what I'm going to be. I'm going to become a world specialist in singing for lung health. Fundamentally, I answered an advertisement. I think it was about 2007, and it was a job advertisement at the Royal Brompton Hospital in London, asking for a singing for breathing practitioner to work on the wards at the hospital. I was a trained shiatsu body worker. Shiatsu is not a small dog, nor is it Reiki. It's a very physical, hands-on body work. I'd also been a singing teacher, or was a singing teacher, run choirs, been a music therapist. So I was really body, breath and voice focused. And I thought, this has got my name all over it. So I turned up and it was terrifying. And there were people in, I'm just pausing, going, 90s translates, doesn't it? We have 90s in Australia.
Yes, we have 90s.
So there were women in sort of very long 90s and thin legs and attached to intravenous antibiotics and oxygen cannulas. And it was terrifying. And I had to go and learn on the job. So I did. I observed. I reflected. I took notes. I talked to respiratory specialists. I've got a folder next to me that is basically those notes from 2007 to 2009, something like that, which became the basis of my singing for lung health training. So the British Lung Foundation approached me in 2015 and said, will you write and deliver training for this work? One of the directors of the British Lung Foundation, it's now called Asthma and Lung UK, observed me running a group at a hospital in London, the Whittington Hospital in North London, and said, we want you to train other people to do this. And by some miracle, and not a little bit of extremely hard work, I've managed to train over about 350 facilitators globally. And what I'd like to end on, Melissa, is I had to pivot online in 2020 and thought, there is no way you can teach this embodied work online. It's going to be a disaster. But actually, since then, I've done 10 blocks of online training, and each one, through the reflection, through the evaluation, through the reworking, has got better and better. And the last one that we just finished made the hairs on my arms stand up. In fact, they're still standing up now as I recall, when the participants started to say, so we've really got to physically workshop these songs, haven't we? We've really got to kind of pull them apart, not just use the material we've already used. We've got to feel it in our own bodies before we invite people with chronic breathlessness. This is a really embodied practice. Bingo. Yeah. And we also now have, as well as singing teachers and community choir leaders and music therapists, interestingly, we've started to have respiratory nurse specialists and respiratory physiotherapists coming to do the training. But I have to say, it's slightly easier, this is a whole podcast, to teach a musical facilitator about respiratory issues than it is to teach a respiratory specialist how to be musical. But it's a really interesting journey and cross-pollination.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think we're going to explore both of those kind of combinations, if you like, in some of the later questions. I wanted to ask you about training or teaching yourself how to do this, you know, building the plane as you're flying it kind of thing at the beginning of your journey with Singing for Lung Health. What are the benefits of learning in that way, do you think? And what are the challenges or the problems with learning that way?
I would like to thank my music therapy training.
Yeah.
It's being able to step into a space and not know what's going to happen and be okay with that. So I remember I don't know if you've heard of somebody called Professor Gary Ansell.
Yes.
He's a music therapist and a very good friend of mine. And I remember saying to him in my job interview at Nordoff Robbins, when I was employed as the head of music services for London there, I wouldn't have done that job as a singing for breathing facilitator as well if I had not also been a trained music therapist. Now, that does not mean there are plenty of people out there who are not trained music therapists who are magnificent community health and music facilitators. But for me, the music therapy training gave me the confidence to walk into a space and to improvise. And actually, Melissa, thinking about it, probably so did going to Goldsmiths as a mature student, as a jazz improviser in a time when the onus was on the instrumentalist. So as a female and as a vocalist, we were always on the back foot back in the 90s. So yeah. So I think it was that ability to not know what was going to happen and to really notice 360 degrees. Does that make sense? 360 degrees. What am I feeling? What am I smelling? You know, what is happening in this space? And that's, again, from the music therapy training, that capacity to deliver. I'm kind of doing it with you now. It's improv, isn't it? Sure. It's conversation. Yeah. To deliver, but also to notice and reflect simultaneously.
Yeah.
And to then retain that information, to be able to go away at the end of the day and write it down. I did this happened. How did that make me feel? What did I think might have been going on?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Here's a challenging question for you, though. The people that you're training now, say the online training sessions that you're running, do they miss out on anything by not having to figure things out themselves, or do you think there's still plenty of space for that?
I think that's been one of the biggest shifts. And thank you for that question. I think as a leader with a strong personality who has a fair dose of insecurity mixed in with my confidence, I always say to people, the more nervous I am, the bigger and more assertive I get. So what I've learned over the delivery of that work is to do use a musical term, a diminuendo over the course of those 8 weeks. So I come in big and strong, but I step back and step back and step back a little bit more each week. So by the time they are in I think it's modules 6 and 7, they are in breakout rooms, working stuff out with each other by themselves. Yeah. And my esteemed colleague, Elizabeth Swain, who, by the way, I think would be fascinating for you to talk to. She's got a lot of very interesting views about music leadership and choirs and teaching. She and I give people space to figure things out for themselves. And she's excellent at asking questions and asking the whys. Because often people will come and say, this is what I do. They might even say, this is how I do it. But then Liz is really good at saying, Why do you do that?
I want to know, for people who don't know what a music therapist does, can you talk us through what's the difference between working as a music therapist and then working with a music therapy qualification in a community group? So do you sometimes wear the therapist hat?
You're going to have to ask me that. Ask me the question again, because I'm not your conventional music therapist.
I know, but there's so much confusion, I think. There's so particularly in the public and even in, healthcare, amongst healthcare professionals, knowing the difference between what a music therapist does, so somebody who's professionally accredited, what that work looks like, and then the work of a community musician, say working in singing for lung health or whatever.
Okay.
What are the differences there?
I'm going to give a very personal and unconventional answer. So my apologies in advance to any other music therapists in the space. For so many years, I've heard that music therapists are working sort of within a biomedical model, treating patients. And I would absolutely disagree. I think if you observed a really good community music facilitator and a really good music therapist in two rooms side by side, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference in what they are doing. I think the advantage that the music therapists have is that they have 2 years of a master's training to really know their stuff. And to really, by their stuff, I mean not only their psychological stuff, and unpacked what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, what that relational impact has. But also musically, we're taught, we how do I say, I'm going to use a provocative word, Melissa. When I say manipulate, we know how to use certain melodies or harmonies in the same way that a songwriter does. It's not rocket science. To have certain impacts or effects. So we know how to move things forward, pull things back, lift things up, drop things down, purely through using harmony mainly, but also rhythm and melody. Whereas a community musician might be doing that really well instinctively, but they won't necessarily have that naming of the toolkit. Now, where I disagree maybe from the mainstream is I think music therapists are not sort of treatment-based. In the UK, the Arts Council England are very clear that they don't support music making that has a clinical outcome, but they're happy to support music making that has a creative outcome. I haven't really answered your question. I've answered it as best I can from my perspective. I think if I'm working as a music therapist or a community musician, I just tilt my cap in a slightly different direction. And what you're going to want me to hone down on is that intention. What is that difference?
Yeah.
For me working as, and this is only me, for me working as a music therapist, and I'm thinking about the prison in particular, so I worked in a high security female prison. I used the music therapy, the way I worked musically was to change narrative and to shift a working relationship that gave a different sense of the person to the client. Oh God, what does that mean? So people came in with a particular view of themselves or how they are in the world or with each other. And I wanted to give them an alternative experience, a more positive experience as to who they were and how they are in the world through musicking.
Yes.
To coin that phrase. Yeah. Whereas if I was working as a community musician, it would be about the feel-good factor, which doesn't mean that it's all light and superficial. But I wouldn't be digging quite so deep. I'd want to be keeping in both spaces safe practice. They call it now trauma-informed. We've been working in a trauma-informed way for years. But I wouldn't be digging deep and doing the work in the same way that I would as a music therapist. So on the wards in the hospital, singing for breathing, I was very aware that if I did a certain thing musically, it might have a particular impact on the ward as a whole, and that wasn't appropriate for a community music facilitation. The difference was, Melissa, I was aware.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if that made any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, but I want to challenge something, and that is if a community musician, a skilled music leader, is working with female offenders like you did, and they're not wearing a music therapy hat, they're not, qualified to do that, but there is still the potential that those prisoners may have an experience whereby they see themselves differently just purely by virtue of participation. Do you know what I mean? And so I guess the difference might be with someone like you working in that situation is that you are able to talk them through that.
There you go, you nailed it. It's the articulation.
It's that reflexivity and that reflection, and to really kind of, I guess, draw out the meaning and the importance of that for that person, whereas that may not necessarily happen if you're a community music facilitator. They might say to you, I've had an experience now, I've done something that I never thought I'd do, I never saw myself as this kind of person, but it's not likely to then turn into a kind of, I guess, a therapeutic conversation.
Yes, and so you put me in mind, there was a community choir that was run in the prison at the same time, and it's exactly what you've said. It's the not being able to articulate it. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have a therapeutic conversation in words with the client, but you're able to write that in your clinical notes. You're able to have an understanding that you are able to articulate. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Okay.
But I worked in a very particular way. So I trained at one university I got a PG dip, and then that was topped up to a master's at another university. But in between, I worked at another music therapy setting, which was it was Nordoff Robbins, which is very musical based, where everything is music, how the person moves, tempo, pace, dynamics. So I had that sort of psychodynamic input, but I also had that musical input, which makes me quite unusual.
Yeah.
That I've had 3 very different trainings, in a way, from 3 different music therapy institutions.
Well, let's talk about the different people that you've worked with across your career. So we've just talked about, working with female offenders. You've worked with children and young people. You've worked with young asylum seekers. What's your entry point or your starting point with each of these diverse groups? Does it change, or is there a fundamental thing that needs to be established every single time, regardless of who's in front of you in the room?
Yeah, safety, trust, love. Isn't that interesting? That word love just popped up. So I'll keep it because it came. Safety, trust, love.
Yeah.
Human being. I'm a human being. You're a human being. I remember women in the prison would say, I've never met anyone like you before. And I'd be like, I've never met anyone like you before. Isn't it great? But it's, and there was a young trafficked woman I worked with from Vietnam, and she didn't have a lot of English. So they thought at the hostel we'll bring in a music therapist rather than a talking counsellor. And we just sit on the floor and she'd draw. And we'd talk, and we'd use pre-composed songs. Or I would choose pre-composed songs to help her voice maybe what she couldn't speak. And as her English improved, she said, you really see me. You really get me. How come, we're only here an hour a week? And I said, just because I'm sitting with you, there's no agenda. So there you go. It's about trust, safety, love, no agenda, being alongside.
Yeah. So what would that look like the first time you meet somebody? How do you set that up?
I think I spend a lot of time making the space look attractive. I'm thinking about the young people I work with, and I worked in a shed in a muddy garden in East Sussex on the coast, which is very windy, and it was freezing. And I spent most of my time walking back and forth from my car with rugs and instruments and putting the heating on in this shed and just making it look really attractive, with scarves and pictures. And making sure that the seating was in that sort of space where you weren't sort of directly facing each other. So making it a really attractive space, which also in the prison was difficult because I worked in a completely bare Muslim prayer room without any windows. So that took a little bit of
Zhuzhing up.
Effort. A little bit of zhuzhing up, Melissa, yes. And that thing about physical space, making sure that you're, and this is the word resonance that I might come back to.
Mm-hmm.
I put something out about resonance recently. That 360 degree, being aware that we don't just pick up on the words, we pick up on the presence and the space. And just being really friendly and smiley and open and waiting, being, God, single words, could do better than this. I mean, the other thing is to explain the boundaries, of course. So it's that combination, and I'm thinking about parenting now, that combination of safe space, love, trust, but secure structures and boundaries around the outside. So explaining, the times of the sessions, not what's expected, but sort of, the logistics and the parameters, the practicalities, and what may or may not be possible, what we might or might not do. Because some people, of course, feel terrified if you give them that much space without structure.
Yeah.
So I suppose kind of what you're doing with me really now, it's opening up that space for dialogue, but that dialogue might not necessarily be with words.
Yeah. Dave Camlin has written about safe danger, I think was the phrase that he used, which I really like, and when you're talking about having the boundary, it's like, we still have something that's going to keep us secure, even if we take a few risks.
I love that phrase from Dave Camlin. I haven't heard it before. And I would move to creative, compassionate disruption.
Oh,
that's mine. Those are my values. But within that creative, compassionate disruption, you have to have, and I'm drawing in the air with my hands a rectangle or a circle. You have to have those boundaries. And may I talk briefly about something performative that I did last year?
Please do.
So I've been away from performance for a long time, but in 2023, I got some money from Arts Council England when the Turner Prize came to my little seaside town. And I brought together some artists, dancers, writers, musicians, forgive me if I've forgotten any modality. And we improvised within a space reflecting community voices in the liminal spaces of a building. So lifts, corridors, stairwells. But the point is that building had very firm boundaries and structures. So there was a way that we could be playful and provocative that was held by the very physicality of that building.
Yeah, great metaphor for the work, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, and we have to work in many different ways to bring those edges in, those boundaries in. And we can do that with our bodies, with our voices, non-verbally, with the music, with the way you set up the room. Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about how you work with a whole range of diverse clients, but you also work with healthcare workers, so nursing students. You do creative health training. What's that all about?
Well, it was strategic originally, in that the funding in the UK for the arts is diminishing. And I'm getting older and I've done a lot of wonderful things. And I thought strategically, how can I introduce the concept of creativity, arts in health, or creative health as it's now called, into a space that will again, cross over into the healthcare space, but in a slightly different way. I think what was really helped was the NHS 10-year plan has just been produced. And one of those requirements is to train healthcare staff in new innovative approaches, valuing creativity and flexibility. There's also a very practical reason in that nurses have to do an inordinate amount of placement hours. And it's sometimes quite hard to get those placement hours. So there's a thing called simulated practice placement. So the training that I offer, the creative health toolkits, music, art, drama, dance, actually meets those requirements for the simulated practice placement hours. It's also continuing professional development. But most importantly, it's a toolkit of self-care so that those who are supporting others can look after themselves first.
Right.
And I think the biggest shock for me was when I asked the students about the soundscapes, the oral landscape in the hospitals. They were using words like overwhelming, traumatic, busy, difficult. And I thought, my God, how is this impacting on you? Yeah. So the biggest takeaways for them was noticing the breath, putting in the pause, being able to move or dance or write creatively to process a difficult day, or draw. And Melissa, have you heard of Desert Island Discs?
Yes.
Desert Island Discs is a very old program in the UK, listening to different people's favourite songs. That is such a powerful exercise to do with the students, because they really understand through talking about their favourite songs how it makes them feel emotionally. And 9 times out of 10, somebody will either burst into tears or burst into laughter when they're sharing their song and their story. So understanding the power of all of these non-verbal creative tools and how it can support them psychologically and physically.
So what's the students' attitude towards this? Is it something that they have to do, or do they opt into it? Because I can imagine if someone opts in, they're genuinely interested. Whereas if it's compulsory, some people might be thinking, why are we doing this?
Yeah. They all think that at the beginning. And I love that. So last month, I think I had 160 students in a lecture hall. And the majority of them at this particular university were either of South Asian, Kerala heritage, mainly young men, or older women, West African heritage, who'd worked as healthcare assistants for many, many years. So that rich cultural mix was just fantastic. And I had this room full of students like literally, what the hell and why are we doing this? And they put that in their evaluation and they were like, but my God, by the end, it was so fantastic to work in small teams, to get to know each other, to build confidence came up again and again and again. So they really all start that journey going, why are we doing this? And by the end, they're like, that was just the best week. Can we have it again, please?
So if we have a health system where health workers all have access to this type of training, what do you think are the flow-on benefits for patients and clients in that healthcare system?
I think from the training that I've done, that confidence is enormous. It's a hierarchical system, as is music. Let's not get into that now. But it means that particularly the young women are able to stand a bit taller, breathe a bit deeper, be heard a bit better, be more present and aware of what is going on, notice what is happening around them. I've just looked to my left, Melissa, and there's a little post-it note on my wall, and it says, creativity provides agency and creative thinking outside the box. So they're able to notice non-verbal ways of working with patients, maybe simply gently humming while a patient is in pain, maybe showing some photographs to see if a patient can use one of those to help explain what they are feeling. Curating playlists for people with dementia, you will know, is phenomenal. Talking about music, creative writing, using dance to help a patient with Parkinson's or aphasia or dementia to get up and out of a chair. So yes, but that's lovely, that quote. Creativity provides agency and creative thinking outside the box, which is going to have a knock-on effect on how the staff move around the space and interact.
There's some great examples there, and quite a few that I hadn't really even thought of, having the confidence, say, if you're a nurse, in communicating with surgeons and things like that, like to have something to kind of fuel that confidence to speak across that hierarchy, I can imagine would be quite useful.
Absolutely. And I think from my colleagues, that real understanding that we are all creative and we all have something in us, whether we like to doodle or knit or craft or listen to music. And that's where I tend to start with them is, don't think of it as something that is out there. It's something you already have in your life that you use to support yourself or used to. Yeah. And don't let that be squished down, particularly now nursing training is, degree level and postgraduate level. Don't get kind of caught up in the academia and your head. Come back to the body and play.
It's so important to remind people that they have this latent within them, and so many people have forgotten it or, feel like they don't have the right to draw on that for various reasons. Yeah.
That's the one. And who am I to give permission? I'm nobody to give permission, but there is that thing of forgetting and remembering that permission to play. It's not illegal.
Yeah, even in a hospital, we tend to think of them as such serious places, and they, in many respects, they are. But at the end of the day, the human being is at the heart of that institution, isn't it? And so the work that you're doing is really highlighting that very important fact.
I would love to do the kind of thing I did with Transit Collective in the art gallery within a hospital. Yeah. For various reasons, it's logistically quite complex without an arts charity overseeing it. So this, I suppose, is my way of slowly that, compassionate creative disruption. Actually, if there's a nurse in a bay who's just gently humming a song that a patient starts to whistle, and becoming aware of that oral soundscape and remembering that, of course, in a hospital bay with a curtain, we pretend that it's a brick wall, but everybody can hear everything. So just thinking about the volume of the voice or how fast they're walking or turning the TV down, understanding that impact of how we move through spaces, has a ripple effect on others. Yeah,
for sure. And isn't it fascinating how we've just sanitized so much of our work environment so that, it's unexpected if you hear someone walking down the hallway and whistling or humming a tune, because we've just become so used to that not being the done thing.
Yes, and I think you've just nailed the absolute heart of my work. And I think it's also why the pandemic was so tough for me, because you can't really disrupt your own small house. Well, my partner might say different, but
you were just desperate to disrupt something. With your music therapy hat on now, can you explain to people who may not be familiar with this term, what is supervision in the context of music therapy?
I'm going to read you something official. It's only a sentence. British Association of Music Therapy. And they say the principal aims of supervision are to protect client safety, which I think is really important to highlight, and to reflect on and develop the clinician's practice. Now, you see, this language I find really interesting because you're immediately putting an arts therapist in as a clinician. But anyway, the supervisee remains responsible and accountable for their clinical work. The role of the supervisor is to support the clinician to develop their clinical practice and to ensure the welfare of the client through the supervision process. So there's a supervisor called Robin Shohei, and this is not just in music therapy supervision, Melissa, but it comes from my supervision training. He's written a book in which he talks about seven-eyed supervision. You all right for me to go into this?
Please.
I'm going to anyway. So
you don't need to ask permission.
There's seven spokes to this. When I am giving supervision to a music therapist, where is the client or the participant in this? And they are absolutely paramount. They are the absolute center of this. What strategies are being used by the supervisee to work with them? What's going on in the relationship between the supervisee and their client? What's going on with the supervisee? What's being triggered or is, writ large for them? What's going on in the relationship between myself and the supervisee? And what are my responses as a supervisor? And then I think there's another one, which is about the broader context, the macro and the micro. So delivering supervision for music therapists is a bit like delivering a music therapy session, in that you've got all of these different things that are coming at you, and you have to make a decision in that split moment, as you are having to do now. Which thread am I going to pick up and run with? Which one is I wanted to use another word than resonating. Which one is being highlighted for me? So yes, I hope, does that answer your question?
It does. And do you, if you're the supervisor, do you use music in a supervisory situation? In
person, absolutely. Unfortunately, I've not done any face-to-face supervision for a while. Yes, totally. Sometimes you can talk and talk and talk and talk, and then you play it and it all makes sense. So slight cul-de-sac, I was talking to a producer a couple of days ago about my own album. We'll come back to that. And we were in a similar situation where we were talking for nearly an hour, and then it was like, actually, do you know what? We just need to get into a room and play together. And quite often in music therapy supervision, particularly with a group, you'll have a sort of intractable situation. You'll have a sort of knot or a gourd that can't be unpicked. And we play it as a group, or two people will play the situation and others will observe, which is a really useful technique and could absolutely be translated to community music. Yeah. And the other people observe what is happening within that dynamic. And by some form of alchemy, generally there is a parallel process between what is played and what has been discussed. I just have not been able to make it work online. I will listen to music online, so I will listen to the music that the music therapist has made with their client. That's a really important part of it. And yes, if in person, music making is a very important part of it.
So obviously this is important part of music therapy professional practice, the supervision. But for community musicians, it's not a thing. It's not in any formal sense a thing. But do you think that it would be useful for community musicians, particularly if they're working in mental health contexts, to have access to this kind of supervision? Or
obviously, I'm biased. I think it's vital, and I am blessed in that in the southeast of England, where I live, but also in other parts of the UK, there are community music organisations who are putting supervision into their funding bids, as well as evaluation. So the majority of my supervisees are now community musicians working in challenging settings, rather than the music therapists. It swings, it's up and down, it changes. So yeah, I supervise a lot of people who are not music therapists, who are working in hospitals and pupil referral units, as they used to be called, care homes. Yeah. And I deliver one-to-one sessions online, and I act as a critical friend or cheerleader. And I suppose it's a bit like the difference between how I was talking about music therapy and community music. It's a slightly lighter touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't use language like transference and projection.
Right.
Which I might with a music therapist.
Yeah.
But I might talk about sensation.
Okay.
You know, what happened? How did you feel? Why might that be? Where did you feel that in your body? What needs unpicking? And also, I've been attending something called an action learning set since 2020 with fellow creatives. And that has taught me to be very much in my back body. What I mean by that is not front focused, eyes on stalks, rather as I am now. Much more sit back in the armchair, put my feet up, open my ears really wide, peripheral vision, and just let the other person talk.
Yeah.
And then just notice what rises up that makes me go, hang on a minute, say that again.
Yeah, that's such a different orientation to the way that we usually conduct ourselves in conversations, isn't it? It's like, let me get a word in now because I want to say something. And, you know.
It's also, Melissa, the work I like doing the best because it is the least exhausting and the most fascinating and curious. And I was going to say helpful, and then I stopped myself, but actually that being witnessed.
Yeah.
Giving somebody space. And often the community musicians are like, oh my God, I didn't even know this was a thing or that I even needed this, but oh my God, I feel so much better. Because they are having to work, they're having to do so much work on so little money. And 9 times out of 10, they're freelance, which I am. And it's just go, 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 go. So to get that hour where they can just pause and talk is really helpful. I do have some question marks around, I'm going to say something controversial. I'm just checking in on myself. I think it's interesting why we choose the work that we choose sometimes.
Say more.
I think a lot of people who work in this field are very compassionate, and I'm checking in on myself as well. Very compassionate empaths, caregivers, but that push to help and support and to give can cause burnout. And I do say that with an understanding of my own personal background. And actually, one of the reasons I left the prison work is when I had my sort of wake-up call around that. But I see that quite a lot, that drive that makes community musicians and music therapists to a degree so brilliant at what they do is also in danger of undoing them because that empathy quota is just compassion fatigue. You know, it's just too much. So simple things like, do you have a break in your session? Yeah. If you have a break in your session, are you making tea for everybody? Or do you actually go outside and breathe? You know, how much are you being involved in your participants' personal lives? How often are you feeling like when something goes wrong in inverted commas in a session, or the group collectively picks up on you and scolds you for the way that you've counted in a song or that you're feeling the pulse? You know, all of these sort of arrows, are they hitting you and holding you in your body? So it's about safe practice, but I think with the reflective practice for community musicians, it's more about them as facilitators rather than about the client or participants.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it just changes the orientation completely. And I think it's just really important what you've pointed out, because so many people who are working in those community contexts are wearing so many different hats and trying to do all the things and be all the things to all the people. And that can be exhausting.
Yeah, we did that. I remember with Singing for Lung Health facilitators, we had a meeting and we did that classic thing, which I'm sure you and others will have done, of the whiteboard and how many different hats do you wear in your role? And you filled up sort of 3 sheets.
Well, speaking of different hats, you've hinted at your origin story. You started your career as a performer and a jazz singer, I believe. But you've dedicated most of your career to really working with others to help them find their voice. Do you miss being the centre of attention on the stage, Phoene?
I love the fact that you use the last 3 words, on the stage. I don't miss on the stage at all. Why Transit Collective was so fantastic was I was able to go into that project as a lead artist and as a creative producer to build the project and then hand over to a movement director and a director dramaturg, and then step into a performing role that I'd never done before. I did sing. I sat and sang Nick Cave Ship Song, and then it's really difficult to describe. If anyone's interested, go on to transitcollective.org and you'll see it. So I was characters, and I was moving around the space as a displaced woman, and also as a naughty, impish twin. So that for me filled my cup, Melissa, right up again, because I stepped into a space that was performative, but I was doing it as an experiment to see how that compassionate disruption could make connections between members of the public in a different way to standing on a stage in a frock, in heels, singing love songs about boys. None of which is relevant or, anything I want to do now. So no, I don't. And I'm looking to my right where I've got a keyboard and a load of music because I hinted on it earlier. I'm going to record my album.
Fantastic.
I think Tim Minchin did it recently. In fact, he has.
Yeah.
Where he revisited songs from 20 odd years ago, and I'm doing the same. So I don't want to gig it. I don't want to stand on a stage again. I don't even want to stand in a room in front of a whole load of people leading a community choir. It's a much, I'm pausing, I was going to say quieter, and I can hear my friends and family laughing. What is it? It's not quieter. It's just steadier. It's a much steadier, I'm 59 next month.
Yeah.
It's a different pace of life now. So no, I don't miss it. It's the short answer.
So you've just revealed that you're 59 and, I'm a woman of a similar age and starting to feel like I'm accumulating some wisdom after all of this time on the planet. And of course, I want to share my wisdom with my 18-year-old daughter who doesn't want to hear a word I've got to say. So I'm going to have to wait for a few years before she might be interested in all of my worldly pearls of wisdom. But hypothetically speaking, what advice would you have for your 18-year-old self, Phoene?
I would say to her, bless my 18-year-old self. I will say to her, in about 25 years, maybe 30, there's a phrase called neurodivergent, which will emerge. And you're fine, and you have ADHD, but nobody thinks about ADHD for 18-year-old women in whenever that was, the 1980s. So all of that confusion and anxiety and just walking into things, because it's probably dyspraxic as well, it's okay. It's actually how your brain works, and the way that your brain works is going to spring forth the most amazing career. Yeah. So be your beautiful, fabulous self. And there's a PS, Melissa, and the PS is go to bed earlier.
She's not listening to that. I'm sorry.
and continue to go to bed earlier and understand that sleep is restorative and is going to help you better than anything else.
Yes, sleep is the
and
superpower.
keep dancing.
Keep dancing.
I sound like Strictly Come Dancing there. Yeah.
All right.
Don't stop dancing.
Well, if we need to get Phoene Cave on the dance floor, what song makes you feel truly alive?
I can't answer that question, and I know that in terms of a soundbite is not helpful. I'm going to answer it with a gig. So there's a venue in London called the Hammersmith Apollo. It used to be called the Hammersmith Odeon. I used to work there in the box office. And there were 2 gigs that I saw there that made me fill with joy. One was Talk Talk and the other was K.D. Lang. So I will go with any of the songs from K.D. Lang or Talk Talk at the Hammersmith Apollo.
Phoene Cave, thank you for making music that matters and for being my guest today on Leading Notes.
My absolute pleasure, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make sure to leave a review. I acknowledge that this podcast is produced on the lands of the Gayabal and Jarawar peoples of the Toowoomba region, and I pay my respect to all elders. Mark Schultes produced the original music for this podcast. Thanks for listening. Now go make music that matters.